Hello everyone, welcome to the world of martial arts. Today, we will explore together the super hot series Renegade Immortal.
Chapter 1, Leaving Home. Taiju was sitting on the side of a little road in the village, looking at the blue sky in a daze. Taiju was not his real name, but due to having a weak body since he was little, his father was afraid he wouldn't be able to keep him alive and gave him this traditional nickname. His real name was Wang Ling. The Wang family was considered a big family name in the area, a family of carpenters. The Wang family was well known in the area, and owned a number of shops that sold wood products. Taizu's father was the second son of the family. He was born from a concubine, therefore, he couldn't take over the family business, so he left the house after he got married and settled in this village. However, due to his father being a skilled carpenter, Taizu's family was pretty well off, not having to worry about food or clothes. They were well respected within the village. Taiju had always been very intelligent since he was little. He loved to read books and had a lot of ideas. Almost everyone in the village agreed that he was a prodigy. Every time his father heard someone praise Taiju, the wrinkles on his face would fade and he would reveal a happy smile. His mother cared for him a lot. One could say that he had grown up in his parents' love. He knew that his parents had high expectations of him. Other children his age were all working in the fields, while he sat at home reading. As one reads more, ideas come naturally. He yearned for the world outside of the village. Taiju raised his head, looked at the end of the road, let out a sigh, closed his book, got up, and walked home. His father was sitting in the courtyard. Holding a pipe, he took a deep breath and said, "Taiju, how goes your studies?" As Taiju walked through the door, Taiju muttered a few words as he passed by. His father shook the ashes out of his pipe, rose up, and said, "Taiju, you have to study properly. Next year is the district exam. Whether you have a future or not will all depend on this exam. Don't end up like me, who will spend my entire life in a village. Honey, you complain about this every day. If you ask me, our Taiju will definitely pass the exam." Taizu's mother carried over some food and set it on the table. She gestured at the two to come and eat. Taiju responded with a sound, then sat down and casually ate a few mouthfuls. His mother affectionately looked at him and passed him the few pieces of meat there were. "Dad, is fourth uncle almost here?" Taiju asked, as he raised his head. Calculating the time, it should be within these next few days. Your fourth uncle is more successful than your father. Hey, Taizu's mum, have the mountain dishes prepared for fourth uncle all been packed? The moment Taizu's father mentioned fourth uncle, there was a hint of sadness on his face. His mum nodded and emotionally said, "Taiju, your fourth uncle is a very good person. In these past few years, it was all thanks to him that your father's wood carvings have stayed at a good price. If you are able to achieve success, don't forget to repay your fourth uncle." As Taizu's mom was talking, the sound of a horse was heard outside the door. Following the sound of the horse-drawn carriage, a hearty laugh could be heard. "Second brother, open the door." Taiju was surprised. He immediately rushed to open the main gate. He saw a strong middle-aged man with bright eyes standing outside. He called out Taizu's name, laughed, and rubbed Taizu's head. Smiling, he said, "Taiju, I only haven't seen you in half a year and you have grown taller again." Taizu's parents immediately stood up. His father, smiling, said, "Fourth brother, I figured it was about time you arrived. Hurry inside." "Taiju, why haven't you gotten a chair for your fourth uncle yet?" Taiju happily agreed. He hurried back into the house, took out a chair, and placed it next to the dining table. He carefully wiped it with his sleeves while looking hopefully at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man winked in his direction and jokingly said, "Taiju, since when were you so diligent? I remember the last time I was here, you were not like this." Taizu's father glanced at Taiju and said, "This little rascal was just inquiring about when you would arrive." The middle-aged man saw Taiju blushing and laughingly said, "Taiju, your fourth uncle hasn't forgotten his promise to you." After he finished speaking, he took out two books and placed them on the table. Taiju excitedly cheered, then flipped through the books. He could barely contain his excitement. Taizu's mom kindly glanced at her son and said to the middle-aged man, Fourth brother, your older brother is always thinking of you. This time, you should stay for a few days. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, second sister-in-law, there are many matters to attend to in the family these days. I must head home early tomorrow morning. After this busy time, I'll come back and see you guys. He gave his second brother a regretful look. Taizu's father sighed, saying, don't listen to my wife. Properly pack the goods tomorrow. The family's matters are more important. We can meet next time. The middle-aged man looked at Taizu's father and asked, second brother, Taizu is 15 years old, yes? Taizu's father nodded and said, after this year, this little rascal is going to be 16. In a flash, more than 10 years has quickly passed by. He looked at his son dotingly. The middle-aged man pondered for a while and said, in a serious tone, second brother, second sister-in-law, I have something to tell you. The Hang Yue sect is taking in disciple. This year, the family has 3 recommendation slots and I received one of them. Taizu's father was stunned and said, with a pale face, Hang Yue sect? But the Hang Yue sect is full of immortals. The middle-aged man smiled, nodded, and said, second brother, it is that very immortal sect. Our family is still a prominent one in the area and has the qualifications to recommend potential disciples. You know my boy, he can't really study, but is good with swords and knives. I doubt the immortal sect will take my son. This spot is really precious. I know Taizu has been very smart since he was little and has always loved to study. He might have a chance. Taizu's mother felt delighted and said, fourth brother this. The middle-aged man rubbed Taizu's head and said, second brother, second sister-in-law, from my view, let this matter be settled. Let Taizu try, if he really gets accepted, it is his fortune. Taizu confusedly looked at his parents and his fourth uncle. He wasn't able to understand what was going on. Immortals? What are immortals? Taizu softly and hesitantly asked. The middle-aged man's face turned serious. Looking at Taizu, he said, Taizu, immortals are those who can fly in the sky, and are simply not something us mortals can understand. Taizu grew curious of immortals. Taizu's father excitedly got up, pulled Taizu's mum, and bowed to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man quickly pulled them up and sincerely said, second brother, what are you doing? My mother died early. If it wasn't for second brother's mother taking care of me, I wouldn't be here today. Taizu is my nephew and this is the least I can do. Taizu's father started crying. He heavily patted the middle-aged man's back, nodded his head, and sternly said to Taizu, remember, Wang Ling, never forget what your fourth uncle has done for us or else I will not consider you my son. Taizu's heart trembled. Although he was ignorant towards immortals, he could tell from parents' expressions that they viewed this matter with great importance. He knelt in front of his fourth uncle and kowtowed a few times. The middle-aged man pulled up Taizu and praised him. Good child. You get ready and I'll pick you up at the end of the month. That night, Taizu went to bed early. He could still hear sounds from his father and fourth uncle. Father was very happy. Even though he rarely drank, he had to drink a few cups with fourth uncle today. Immortals, what were they? Taizu's heart was very excited. He knew in his heart that this was an opportunity to see the outside world. Fourth uncle left early the next morning. Taizu and his parents saw him off at the village entrance. On the way back, he noticed that his father looked a lot younger. His eyes were filled with hope. The expectations in his eyes were much greater than the time he wanted Taizu to pass the district exam. There was no secret in the village, even if it was how many pups a dog gave birth to. Everyone in the village would hear the news. Soon, everyone in the village knew the news from Taizu's mother and all the neighbors came in to visit. Everyone's eyes were different from before as they looked at Taizu with envy and jealousy. The Wang family gave birth a good son. He has been accepted as a disciple of the Hang Yue sect. I have watched this child, Taizu, as he grew up. He was very smart since he was little. Now he is a Hang Yue sect disciple. He has a very promising future. Taizu, you have great talent. When you are successful in the future, don't forget to come back and visit. These talks filled Taizu's ears, acting like Taizu was already a Hang Yue sect disciple. Every time his parents heard it, they couldn't stop smiling. The wrinkles on their faces had lessened greatly. Whenever Taiju would walk alone in the village, all of the villagers passionately asked him about this and that. There were even people who told their kids to follow Taiju as an example. Half a month passed by quickly. The news of Taiju becoming a Heng Yue sect disciple quickly spread. All of the villagers nearby came to see Taiju. Everyone who came by brought gifts. Taizu's parents couldn't reject them, but as they left, Taizu's parents planned return gifts. According to Taizu's father, our son will be an immortal in the future, so he can't owe any favors. We will prepare return gifts for all the visitors. Soon, the Wang family learned that Taizu's fourth uncle gave his son's spot to Taiju. One after another, they came to congratulate him. Taizu's father attached great importance to the visiting relatives, as many of them used to look down on him in the past and drove him out of the family all those years ago. Now that they were all coming to visit him, he swept away his sorrows. He and Taizu's mother discussed a bit and decided to properly entertain everyone. They spent a fortune to hire the village teacher to write invitations to send to their relatives. The village teacher didn't want money, but wanted Taiju to acknowledge that he grew up studying in his care. Taiju had no objections as this was the truth. After the invitations were sent to most of the Wang family members, there were so many people that Taizu's dad had to move the party's location to the village square and set up a feast. The villagers helped entertain the guests. As they spoke to each other, they would praise Taiju endlessly. Taizu's dad brought his wife and son to the village entrance to personally greet the guests and introduce each relative to Taiju. This is your third grandfather. When father left the family, your third grandfather secretly helped a lot. Taiju, you have to remember to repay his kindness, Taizu's father said, as he helped a white-haired old man. Taiju quickly agreed. The old man looked at Taiju and said, Lao, time passes by so fast. Your son is already this big. He has better prospects than you. Taizu's father's face was full of radiance. He smiled, and said, Third grandfather, Taiju has been smart ever since he was a kid. He was bound to be better than me. Take your time. Wife, help support third grandfather. Taizu's mother quickly helped the old man walk toward the feast. Seeing the old man leaving, Taizu's father let out a snort and said to Taiju, This old guy looked down on your dad and forced me away. Now that you have a good future, he comes to congratulate me. He is just that kind of relative. Taiju cluelessly nodded and asked, Is fourth uncle coming? Taizu's father shook his head. Your fourth uncle sent a letter. He won't be able to come back until the end of the month. At that moment, another carriage arrived at the village entrance. A 50-plus-year-old man came out. He looked at Taizu's father and said, Lao, congratulations. Taizu's father's face turned complicated and said, Big brother. The old man's eyes swept across and looked at Taiju. He smiled. Lao, so this is your son? Not bad. Maybe he will really be selected. Taizu's father frowned, stretched, and said, Taiju might not have much merit, but he is smart and loves to read books. He is bound to be selected. That is not necessarily true. When immortal sects look for disciples, there are very strict requirements. I see this kid is very dumb. Going is a waste of time, said a haughty voice from the carriage, as a 16 or 17-year-old boy stepped out. The young boy looked very pretty. He had eyebrows like scimitars, a face like guanu, and eyes full of disdain. Taizu's father glared at him and Wang Ling gave him a deep look, but didn't say anything. The old man's face changed color and shouted, Wang Chiwo, how can you be so rude? This is your second uncle and your little brother Wang Lin, why haven't you greeted them? He turned to Taizu's father and said, My son's speech is ugly. Lao, don't mind him, but... As he was talking, he suddenly turned and said, But Lao, it is not a simple matter for these immortals to accept a disciple, it is a matter of fate. This time, it's because the Heng Yue sect was very interested in my son that our Wang family was given 3 spots, including his. Taizu's father snorted and said, If your son can do it, then my son will definitely be selected. The youth laughed, not caring about the old man's words. With disdain, he said, So, you are second uncle. I suggest you don't be so optimistic. The way of cultivation is very complex, and only 1 in 10,000 people can even learn it. How can he compete with me, who, while not being an official disciple yet, was personally selected by an immortal teacher? The old man's face flashed with the color of pride, scolded the youth, and brought him toward the feast. Taiju, don't worry. Even if you are not selected, it doesn't matter. There is always the district exam next year. Taizu's father earnestly said, after suppressing his anger. Wang Ling confidently whispered, Dad, don't worry. I'll be selected. Taizu's dad gently patted his son's shoulder. His eyes were filled with rays of hope. One after another, they greeted a lot of relatives. Taizu's father took him back to the feast. In front of them was a bustling scene of people celebrating. Taizu's father cried out, My dear relatives, my fellow villagers, I, Wang Tianshui, am not a very cultured man and don't have much to say, but today, I'm very happy because my son has a chance to become a Heng Yue sect disciple. This is the happiest moment of my life. I won't say more, but thank you all for coming. He raised his cup and drained it of the wine within. Lao, your son has been very smart ever since he was little. He will definitely be selected like Guangzu's son and become an immortal. Second brother, having a son like Taiju, you have not lived your life in vain. In the future, all you have to do is wait to enjoy the good fortune. Taiju, you must make your father proud. This time, no matter what, you must enter the Heng Yue sect. There were numerous bright scenes everywhere. The sounds of celebration came from all sides, but there were many people, like Huang Chiao's father, who on the surface was giving his congratulations, but in his heart had always looked down upon his brother and his brother's son. He looked at his son, and then at Taiju. He felt very dissatisfied. Fourth brother's actions were outside of his expectations, but as the immortals weren't blind, there was no way Taiju would be selected. People passed by, one by one. Taizu's father pulled Taiju around from table to table to give a toast and introduce various unknown relatives to him. Today, Taizu's father drank a lot of wine. He was never this well regarded. The feast lasted until it was very late and everyone started to head home. Before leaving, and still with a look of contempt, Wang Qiao, while no one noticed, whispered to Taiju, Little fool, you won't be selected. You don't have the ability. He left with his father as he displayed a smile full of contempt. After returning home, Taiju lied on his bed. He secretly decided in his heart that he must be selected no matter what. Half a month passed by quickly. Today, Taizu's fourth uncle arrived in a carriage. Taizu's parents quickly welcomed him inside. The middle-aged man washed his face and hurriedly said, Second brother, second sister-in-law, I can't stay long this time. I'm taking Taiju and leaving. The Heng Yue sect will arrive to pick up the potential disciples tomorrow morning. Taizu's father was stunned. A trace of sadness appeared on his face. He firmly said, Fine. Taiju, follow your fourth uncle. If you are selected, study dutifully at the Heng Yue sect. However, if you aren't selected, don't worry and come back home. Taiju, not wanting to leave his parents, nodded heavily. His mother took out a parcel from the room and lovingly said, Taiju, listen to your fourth uncle and don't cause any trouble. The outside is not the same as home. You must have patience. Mother has prepared you some new clothes. Also, there are some of your favorite, baked sweet potatoes. Mother will miss you. If you are not selected, just come back. As Taizu's mom was talking, tears began appearing in her eyes. Taiju had never left the village ever since he was born. This was his first time leaving. Fourth uncle emotionally said, Taiju, you must be selected to make your parents proud. Second brother, second sister-in-law, the family will have a big celebration in a few days, so I am too busy today. Tomorrow, I'll pick you guys up. The results for the 3 candidates should be out by then. He quickly pulled Taiju onto the carriage, whipped the horse, and set off. With tears in their eyes, Taizu's parents stared at the carriage as it quickly disappeared into the distance. Taiju has never left home before. Will he be bullied? Taizu's mom said, while biting her lip. Her eyes were filled with sadness. He has grown up and is to deal with his own fortune. Taizu's father picked up his pipe and inhaled deeply. More wrinkles appeared on his face. Chapter 2, Immortals. As the carriage quickly rolled along the road, Wang Lin's body bounced with the uneven ground. In his arms was the package that contained all of his parents' hopes. He was leaving the village he had lived in for 15 years. The trip wouldn't be a short one. Wang Lin lied down and fell asleep in the carriage. Not knowing how much time had passed, he was gently nudged. He opened his eyes to look up to see fourth uncle, who looked at him smiling and asked, "Taiju, how do you feel about leaving home for the first time?" Wang Lin noticed that the carriage had stopped, and smiled. "Not much to say, just a little anxious since I don't know if I will be selected by the Immortals or not." Fourth uncle let out a laugh and patted Taizu's shoulder, saying, "Okay, don't overthink it. This is uncle's house. You go rest first, then I'll take you to the family tomorrow morning." When he climbed off the carriage, Wang Lin was in front of a tile-roofed house. He then followed fourth uncle to a room. Wang Lin sat on the bed, unable to sleep. The things his parents, village, and relatives said flashed through his mind. He signed in his heart. The thought of becoming the disciple of an immortal became heavier in his mind. Time passed by, bit by bit. A moment later, the sun gradually rose. Wang Lin didn't get much rest the whole night, but he was still full of energy. With a trace of fear, he followed fourth uncle to the main house of the Wang family. This was the first time Wang Lin had seen a house this big, leaving him in a daze. Fourth uncle said while walking, "Taiju, you have to make your father proud. Don't let the relatives ridicule you." Wang Lin's mind became more tense. He bit his lips and nodded. Soon, fourth uncle brought him to the middle of the courtyard. Taizu's father's eldest brother was standing there. When he saw Taiju, he nodded and said, "Taiju, when the immortal arrives, don't freak out, just follow your older brother Wang Chiwo. Do everything he does." The old man's tone was very harsh on those last few words. Wang Lin stayed silent. He looked around and noticed that beside Wang Chiwo there was another youth. The youth's skin was a bit dark, his build was very large, and his eyes showed hint of intelligence. There was a bulge in his shirt, like he was hiding something. He looked at Taiju and made a face, then ran over and said, "So your second uncle's son? My name is Wang Hao." Wang Lin chuckled and nodded. When the old man saw Wang Lin ignoring him, he became very annoyed and was about to scold him. Right at this moment, the clouds in the sky suddenly split open. Then a sword of light suddenly descended like lightning. After the light disappeared, there stood a youth in white whose eyes were bright and piercing, emitting an elegant spirit. His cold eyes swept across the three youths, especially at the youth with the bulge in his shirt. He asked coldly, "Are these three the ones recommended by the Wang family? This is an immortal?" Under his gaze, Wang Lin started to feel cold. His heart pounded and his face paled while staring at the immortal. The dark-skinned youth, upon seeing immortal, placed his hands near the pockets of his pants, showing a respectful demeanor. His eyes held a fanatical expression. Only Wang Chiwo casually looked at the others and snorted. Wang Chiwo's father quickly stepped forward and respectfully said, "Immortal, these three are the Wang family's recommendations." The youth nodded and then impatiently said, "Who is Wang Chiwo?" The old man's face showed a flash of happiness, then he quickly pulled Wang Chiwo. "Immortal, this is my son, Wang Chiwo." The immortal youth gave Wang Zhou a deep look. Then his face brightened and he nodded. Wang Zhou is indeed talented, no wonder martial uncle took a liking to him. Wang Zhou proudly looked at Wang Lin and the smart-looking youth and proudly said, "This is natural. In order to become an immortal, one must have a strong spirit." The youth made a frown, but it quickly disappeared. He faintly smiled at Wang Chiwo's direction, waved his sleeves, and took the three youths on the rainbow and disappeared. Fourth uncle looked into the sky and muttered, "Taiju, you must be selected." Wang Lin felt his body lighten, and the wind hitting his face caused him pain. On closer inspection, he noticed that he was under the arm of the youth, and they were flying quickly through the sky. The village turned into little black dots as they quickly flew forward. After just a little, the wind caused his eyes to tear up and turn red. "Unless you three want to become blind, close your eyes," the youth said coldly. Wang Lin's heart tensed, and he quickly closed his eyes, afraid to decay. EP looking. After a short period of time, Wang Ling could feel that the youth was short of breath and his speed started decreasing. Then, in a flash, the youth quickly descended. The moment before landing, the youth loosened his arm and the three youths fell to the ground. Thankfully, the fall wasn't hard, so the three got up quickly. In front of Wang Ling was a paradise-like scene, with mountains, flowers, and a river. It was a truly idyllic scene. Straight ahead stood a towering mountain, its peak covered in clouds that hid its true appearance. Echoes of beasts' cries could be heard. There was a path of twisted steps that snaked its way down the mountain, like a painting, evoking a feeling of a different world. Far off in the distance, there was a hall at the top of the mountain. Even though it was covered by the clouds, the shining bright light made people to want to worship it. Next to the hall, there was a silver-colored bridge with the shape of the crescent moon connecting that peak with another mountain peak. With these natural beauties, this was truly worthy of being the location of the Heng Yue sect. The Heng Yue sect was one of the few cultivation sects in the country of Zhao. 500 years ago, it was the leading force of cultivation sects in the country of Zhao and had several nascent soul-old monsters. However, with the passage of time, it had shrunken to its current size and was only able to barely have a foothold in the cultivation world. However, for the mortals near the Heng Yue sect, it was still an elusive figure. Little brother Zhang, are these the three candidates recommended by the Wang family? A middle-aged man dressed in black with an immortal demeanor floated down from the mountain peak. The youth showed a face full of respect and said, "Third brother, these are the Wang family's three recommended youths." The middle-aged man's gaze swept across them, focusing on Wang Zhou a few times. Smiling, he said, "I know you are about to have a breakthrough. I'll handle the test, you go cultivate." The youth agreed, then his body moved toward the mountain, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Wang Ling stared at the scene before him full of excitement. Suddenly, he noticed someone tugging his clothes and turned around. It was Wang Hao. Eyes filled with excitement, he said, "This is where immortals live, damn it. No matter what, Wang Hao, must be selected." After saying so, he touched the bulging object concealed in his shirt. Chapter 3, Test. Wang Zhou was dazed by the scene before him. It took a long time for him to recover his senses, and the amount of arrogance in his heart shrank. At this moment, several rainbow-colored swords flew towards them. For each sword that dissipated, there was a Heng Yue sect disciple, each followed by several 15-year-olds. There were both male and female youths. As they landed, they too had similar expressions to Wang Lin's group as they stared at the scene in front of them. All the Heng Yue sect disciples that brought the youths gathered at the side and started talking about the youths. After waiting a while, all the other youths who had been recommended arrived at the sect. A black-clad middle-aged man scanned the area. Then he emotionlessly said, "Among the lot of you, only a few will be selected to be Heng Yue sect disciples." All of the youths cried out in shock. Wang Lin's heart shuddered. He counted a total of 48 people taking the test. Cultivation, the path to becoming an immortal, depends on your natural talent. The first test is to see whether or not your spirit is strong enough. Now, whoever I point to will come up and take the test. The middle-aged man emotionlessly pointed at a youth. The youth walked over carefully, his legs trembling. The middle-aged man put his hand on his head and said, "Not qualified. Stand to the left." The youth suddenly lost all strength. Face looking bleak and eyes blank, he moved to the left in silence. Then another youth was selected. He moved forward with a fearful expression. "Not qualified. Not qualified. Not qualified." 10 people in a row all failed the test. Up until now there was still no one to the right of the middle-aged man. It was Wang Qiao's turn. All of his previous pride disappeared from his face. Looking pale, he stepped forward. After the middle-aged man put his hand on Wang Qiao's head, his face suddenly lit up and he asked, "What is your name?" Wang Qiao quickly replied respectfully, "Immortal, my name is Wang Qiao." The middle-aged man nodded. He then smiled and said, "So you are the one martial teacher mentioned. Good. Wang Qiao, stand to the right." Wang Qiao felt exultation and walked toward the right under everyone's admiration. His eyes were filled with arrogance and contempt as he looked at the crowd. He felt untouchable. "Motherfucker, he is one lucky dog. Wang Hao murmured to Wang Lin while curling his lip. Wang Lin's heart became more tense. In front of his eyes rose his parents' eyes filled with expectations. He tightened his fists. "Not bad." "You also stand to the right," said the middle-aged man, surprised, to the young girl in front of him. After a short period of time, almost all the youths had been tested and only 2 stood to the right of the middle-aged man. Wang Hao was up next. Wang Hao quickly ran up to the middle-aged man. Before he could even start the test, he knelt to the ground and kowtowed a few times. He said, "Immortal, may you enjoy a long life. My name is Wang Hao. You have already tested so many people, so you must be tired. Why don't you rest for a while? I'm in no rush, it's no problem." The middle-aged man laughed out loud. He had tested so many people whose faces were filled with fear, yet this clever youth here, without the slightest bit of fear, was trying to win favor with him. He pressed his hand on Wang Hao's head and said, "Talent is lacking. Not." The moment Wang Hao heard that his spirit was lacking, his heart plummeted. Without waiting for the middle-aged man to finish, he quickly took out a jade box and presented it in front of him. Wang Hao wisely said, "Immortal, my father found this by accident in the mountain but was unable to open it. I specially brought it to give to Immortal." The middle-aged man chuckled and shook his head. He was about to refuse Wang Hao, but as he scanned the box, his pupils suddenly contracted and his face suddenly lit up. "Not bad. This is at least a 300-year-old mushroom." Looking at the jade box, it was sealed by a cultivator. "No wonder your father couldn't open it." He paused, then said with a slightly faltering voice, "I'm in need of a helper for my alchemy. Are you willing to be my helper?" Wang Hao, surprised, got up quickly. The difference in treatment was like heaven and earth, causing him to be very excited. He exclaimed, "Yes, Immortal, I am willing." The middle-aged man said, while chuckling, "Since you'll be my helper, I won't mistreat you. You can cultivate just like the other disciples. Go stand to the right." Wang Hao was very excited inside. He ran to the right side and gave Wang Chuo a triumphant stare. The faces of all the youths that failed turned pale. All of them felt very depressed. A few even started crying. The middle-aged man frowned. He shouted, "Send away all those who started crying." A few of the Heng Yue sect disciples stepped out. They quickly took the ones that started crying and casually disappeared in swords of light. The middle-aged man pointed at Wang Lin. Wang Lin took a deep breath. He nervously walked toward the side of the middle-aged man, his mind completely blank. Praying silently in his heart, he couldn't help but remember the expectation in his parents' eyes. "I will definitely be selected," Wang Lin thought with determination. The middle-aged man's hand pressed on his head. With a deadpan face, he said the 2 words Wang Lin dreaded the most. "Not qualified." Wang Lin didn't remember how he made it to the left side, he only heard the spring thunder roaring in his ears and the echoing of the 2 words the middle-aged man said. After a moment, everyone had been tested, and only 3 people stood to the right. In the eyes of everyone else, the 3 were insurmountable and immensely tall. Wang Chuo looked at Wang Lin with a face full of contempt, fully expressing his disdain for him. While a strong spirit is needed to be cultivator, perseverance is even more important. Even ordinary students like you can become sect disciples if you have enough perseverance. The second test is perseverance. The middle-aged man paused, then said with a deadpan face, "Follow the steps up. If you reach the top, you are qualified. If you're not finished within 3 days, you fail. Those who fail will be returned to their families. If you cannot endure any longer or meet danger, just yell out loud and someone will come and save you." The middle-aged man smiled to the 3 on his right and said, "You too, follow me to meet the patriarch. We will also find you masters. Wang Hao, you don't need to go, come with me to the alchemy house to get used to the place." After the middle-aged man finished giving instructions, he took the 3 selected youths and disappeared into the mountains. Wang Lin took a deep breath, eyes full of determination. He walked up the stone steps with no hesitation and started the test of perseverance. Minus the 3 selected youths and the 6 crying youths who were taken away, 39 remained. Among these 39 youths, the ones that were very depressed, the ones very determined, and those who were scared all walked towards their own futures. Chapter 4, Heartless. The uneven stone steps were very dangerous on both sides. The slightest mistake would cause one to slip and fall. After less than half a day, Wang Lin's legs felt like they were made of lead. He was sweaty and out of breath. It was difficult to even move. Looking up from the bottom of the mountain, the trail didn't seem long, but now, this trail felt like it had no end. Wang Lin's heart sank. He could not help but generate thoughts of despair. In front of him there were a dozen physically strong boys, slowly climbing. They were all also out of breath. Until now, no one had given up. Wang Ling gritted his teeth. He knew this was his last chance. His parents' expectations filled his mind. At that very moment, the foot of a boy behind him slipped. The boy fell off the side of the mountain with a scream. "I give up. Help." Everybody stopped to look down at the same time and saw a dark light flashing by. A Hang Yue sect disciple appeared out of nowhere and grabbed the boy. Their bodies could be seen gently falling to the foot of the mountain. Wang Lin was pale and silent. He carefully continued climbing upwards. Time seemed to be passing much more slowly. 2 days later, he could see the shadows of the dozen of youths in front of him. Wang Lin didn't know how many of these companions would give up, he only knew that he must not give up. His feet were bleeding and swelling. He felt a terrible tingling every step he took. He still persisted and used his hands to climb. A middle-aged man with a sickly complexion floated down the stairs from the top of the mountain. "Little children, keep your hearts strong, for this path is ruthless. It won't be in vain, nothing is in vain." He let out a lengthy sigh as he floated down past the climbing youths. The middle-aged man passed Wang Lin. This was the 6th youth he passed by, and he was the most pathetic of the bunch. With clothes soaked with blood, he seemed to be bleeding everywhere. His knees and toes were mangled. Wang Lin was climbing using his hands at this point. The middle-aged man sighed loudly and asked, "My child, what is your name?" Wang Lin's vision was blurry. The only thought in his head was to reach the top or die. He didn't even hear the middle-aged man's question. In his eyes this little trail was the only thing that mattered. The middle-aged man looked at Wang Lin's eyes. Deep down, he was rather moved. He put his hand on Wang Lin's head. "This boy has amazing perseverance. It's too bad he lacks talent. What a waste, what a waste." He gave Wang Lin a deep look, then continued to descend the steps. The next night, Wang Lin's hands were bloody. He left a trail of blood as he climbed the stairs. He did not know how he kept going, but something kept fueling his body to go on. He felt like he could die at any time. The sun rose on the 3rd day. In the distance, Wang Lin could just barely make out the end of the stone steps. Unfortunately, with the end in sight, he heard a thunderous voice that shook his heart. "Time is up. Only 3 have qualified. The rest failed." Wang Lin let out a small, bitter laugh. He looked down while his body was slanting down on the stairs. His consciousness completely faded. The black-clad middle-aged man from 3 days ago stood on top of the mountain. He was looking at Wang Lin from less than 50 meters away with a ruthless look in his eyes. A few Hang Yue sect disciples went down from the top of the mountain. They each stopped next to one of the youths on the way down and fed them medicine. A female Hang Yue sect disciple said in a cold voice, "Seniors, out of 39 testers, 25 gave up. Only 3 passed the test, and 11 remain." She had also experienced this brutal test. She relied on the martial arts she had practiced since she was a child to pass. She barely had enough perseverance. Even now, after 10 years of effort, she still hadn't become a true disciple. The black-clad middle-aged man had an icy look in his eyes. He slightly nodded while his eyes swept past the 11 unconscious teenagers. "Take the 3 that qualified and find work for them to do in the future. Send the 25 that gave up back to their families. As for the last 11 people, wait for them to wake up. Send them together to the house of the Sword Spirit to see if any of them have spiritual affinity with the Sword Spirit. If they don't, send them home." After the middle-aged man was finished here, he walked away without another glance at the youths below. 3 days later, at the house of the Sword Spirit, stood 11 teenagers with pale faces. The injuries all over Wang Lin's body were already healed, but the wound in his heart was still gaping open. The pain of his failure kept eating away at his mind and body. This test of the spirit of the sword was conducted not by the black-clad middle-aged man, but by a man wearing white, someone they hadn't seen before. He had the same cold, ruthless look in his eyes. He looked at the youths as if they were ants. The man said, with an impatient look, "This is the last test. If you can walk into this room, you are qualified." All Wang Ling saw was an extremely common building. The front door of the building was open. When he looked inside, he could see swords of different lengths. Each of the youths, one by one, walked towards the house. The first one that approached got within 5 meters of the house. His face went red as he struggled to get closer, but was expelled by an invisible force. "Unqualified." "Next," said the man in white. Wang Ling was the 7th in line. The 6 before him all met the same fate, expelled by an invisible force when they got within 5 meters of the house. He smiled bitterly, and with the last bit of hope in his heart, stepped forward. As he approached the 5-meter mark, Wang Ling was able to keep going with ease. His heart was beating rapidly with anticipation. He stepped closer, 1 meter more. He wasn't feeling any discomfort yet. The white-clothed man let out a surprised hey. His eyes were bright, and his face showed slight interest. He gently said, "Don't hesitate to continue. Keep walking towards the house of the spirit of the sword. If you are recognized by the spirit of the sword, you will be accepted as a true disciple, even if you failed the 2 previous tests." The 10 other teenagers standing there had the color of envy in their faces. They were deeply jealous of Wang Ling. Wang Ling was very tense on the inside. The looks his parents gave him flashed through his mind again as he stepped 1 meter closer to the door. There were only 3 meters remaining to reach the door. Wang Ling took another step. He suddenly felt a huge force rush in his direction. Wang Ling lost control of his body and was sent flying more than 10 meters away. The rest of the youths all looked at Wang Ling with mocking expressions in their eyes. They thought that Wang Ling was just like them after all, with no chance. With a bitter laugh, Wang Ling could feel the gaping wounds in his heart grow bigger. His parents' expectant eyes gradually dissipated from his mind. The man in white's eyes turned cold again and he said, "Failed." Next. Chapter 5, The Return. In the end, none of the 11 youths passed the test. There was one young girl who made it as far as Wang Ling. On that day, all of the youths that failed the test were sent back to the bottom of the mountain. The Hang Yue sect disciples took them home one by one. The one that came to take Wang Ling home was the same youth that had picked him up. Behind him was Wang Qiwo and Wang Hao. The youth clasped his hands and said, "Brother Wang Qiwo, congratulations on becoming Uncle Master's disciple. You have a bright future ahead of you." Wang Qiwo's face showed an arrogant expression. He proudly said, "It is only natural. Master said that after I have finished taking care of the mundane affairs at home, he will teach me cultivator techniques after I return." Wang Hao raised his head and added on the side, "I've always looked down on your arrogant demeanor. So what if you have a master? I will be able to learn how to produce immortal pills." Wang Qiwo gave Wang Hao a hard stare, then he shifted his gaze to Wang Ling, who silently stood there. He smiled, and said, "Taizhu, how was it? I told you before that you didn't have the ability, but both you and your father wouldn't believe it. Now we know the result." Taizhu raised his head, glanced slightly at Wang Qiwo, and said, "Sir, my parents are waiting for me at home. Please take me back as soon as possible." Wang Qiwo saw Wang Ling dare to ignore him and sneered. "Little bumpkin, you are better off becoming a carpenter in a little village for the rest of your life, like your father." The immortal youth let out a faint smile as he looked at the 3 youths in front of him, but didn't say a single word. He waved his sleeves and brought the 3 along as they disappeared from the Hang Yue sect mountain. Comparing this flight to last one, Wang Ling's mood was like heaven and earth. Before, he was full of hope, but now, he was full of despair. A little while later, the Wang clan's house came into view. Wang Ling opened his eyes. He could see from afar the clan house that was lit up in celebration with a lively atmosphere. There were far more banquet tables than when his father had organized the feast at the village. They covered almost the whole yard. All the Wang family members were there. Even those who were away buying lumber had come back. The celebration was in full swing, full of drinking and chatter. The lead of the banquet was Wang Jianshui's older brother, Wang Jianshui, and Wang Jianshui's third brother. All the relatives surrounded the three of them to give them their congratulation. The scene was very festive. Their eyes were filled with envy, but their mouths were full of flattery. Especially towards Wang Lin's father, who couldn't help but remember the sadness from his past. Wang Lin's sixth uncle exclaimed, "Second brother, this time your son will be selected for sure. After this you don't have to be a carpenter anymore. Anyone who sees you will have no choice but to call you elder." Wang Jianshui's fifth uncle said, "Lao, back in the days I already knew your life wouldn't be normal. You devoted your life to Taizhu. Now that he is going to be an immortal, you as his father must be extraordinary. Second brother, this time both your kid Taizhu and my son will be selected. Us brothers haven't met each other in 10 years. This time, we must have a drink together, no matter what," said Wang Hao's father, as he brought over glasses of wine. He was also Wang Jianshui's third brother. Taizhu's father looked at all the relatives that used to look down on him. All the sorrow from his past was swept away. However, he couldn't help but feel a giant rock weighing down his heart. "Taizhu, you must be selected. Second sister-in-law, this time your marriage to second brother has brought you good fortune. Having Taizhu as your child, who in the neighboring area won't know you. Second sister-in-law, your kid Taizhu has more ability than my child. Ever since Taizhu was little, he has been very smart. Taizhu's mother, even though we are of the same family, there are many consanguine relatives who have married nowadays. My daughter is unmarried, and is about the same age as Taizhu. Taizhu is handsome and I like him. Why don't we tie the knot between our families?" Like Taizhu's father, his mother was surrounded by a group of female relatives who were enthusiastically chattering beside her. Wang Zhao's father held an indifferent look the whole time. He secretly desired for the immortal to come and deliver the news that Taizhu had not been selected, so he could see his second brother's reaction to it. As he thought of this, he let out a laugh and toasted the relative next to him that was praising his child. The scene was bustling and full of spirit. At that moment, a sword of light appeared and landed in the courtyard. 4 people came with it. The area immediately quieted down. No member of the Wang family dared to say a word. The Heng Yue sect disciple swept across the area and secretly sighed. He remembered when he was selected as a Heng Yue sect disciple. His hometown was celebrating like this as well. He suddenly gave Wang Lin a look of pity. He knew that the thing that this youth was about to experience wasn't something a youth could handle. He has a ruthless path ahead of him. The disciple shook his head and left in a sword of light. Immortal practitioners can't have any earthly desires. Take care of what you need to. I'll come pick you up in 3 days. His voice echoed from the distance. When Wang Qiao's father saw the immortal leave, he quickly rushed up to his son and asked, "Did immortal Hui Bing take you as his disciple?" Wang Qiao said, with a face full of pride and arrogance, "Naturally. Master has said that in 10 years I'll be able to become the head of Heng Yue sect disciples." Wang Qiao's father was overjoyed. He patted his son heavily on the shoulders, and laughed. "Good, Wang Qiao, you will be an immortal in the future. Our Wang family will have an immortal." Wang Hao's father's face also had an anxious expression while staring at Wang Hao. When he was about to ask, Wang Hao let out a sigh and said, "Dad, you don't have to ask. Your son is already a Heng Yue sect disciple." Wang Hao's father was ecstatic. He picked up his cup and fiercely drank. Wang Qiao had a disgusted look on his face. He said contemptuously, "Third uncle, you gave birth to a good son. He has lost the Wang family a lot of face." In front of everyone he flattered the immortal and then, only relying on a bribe was he able to become a helper. Wang Hao raised his brow and said, "I'm happy, so what? In the future, let us see who has stronger cultivator techniques, then we will see who has lost the family face." Taizu's father saw the depressed expression his son wore, causing his body to shudder. He had an ominous feeling. "Taizhu, what about you?" Taizu's mother asked, full of expectation.